welcome. Glad you're here for this very, very special event. It's part of our 5 shows celebration. Gentlemen that we all know just because we're New Yorkers, and the work that he's had on New York stages over the years and York stages over the years is very impressive, and we're delighted to be celebrating him in our multi-series. Would you please welcome the gentleman of the evening, Mr. Tom Jones.
Thank you all for coming. We're coming to this evening, and I assume come to some or possibly even all of the shows in the series. It's been a great adventure so far.
We've had, for those of you who don't know, we've had 2 so far, The Show Goes On and Roadside, both really wonderful. And we've got 2 more coming up. Beginning rehearsal on Monday. Next Monday is Harold and Maude that Tom wrote with Joseph Dolphin.
Called in Japan. Called in Japan, Haro and Modo. I get to see it over there.
And following that is another show that Tom wrote with his longtime composer, collaborator Harvey Schmidt, Colette Collage, celebrating the famous French writer. And finally in the series is The Game of Love, which is, along with Harold and Maude, a New York premiere. And it's written with Nancy Ford, who may be here this evening. Nancy. And the silent but wonderful composing partner, Jacques Offenbach, who is not often around, but he's Offenbach.
Jacques Offenbach is a great person to work with. No problem. Not that Nancy is any problem either.
Anyway, if you have not already gotten tickets, please do. We have more fabulous casts coming up for these shows, and they're going to be very exciting pieces of theater. So, Tom, where should we start?
Let's start
at the very
acting in a galaxy far away, by which I mean mid-20th century America, at the University of Texas, where I was a drama student studying to be a director, and I was there 6 years. I got a bachelor's degree and a master's degree. Anything to avoid going out into the real world. In fact, I would still be a student there if the Korean War had come along and I got drafted. But we did, in my 6 years that I was at the University of Texas, we never did a musical. Not even Gilbert and Sullivan. We did lots of plays, and lots of interesting plays, and even some new plays, and lots of the classics. But musicals, I think, were just considered too frivolous. That was part of it. And the other part of it was that the drama department and the music department hated each other. You know, there was an intense rivalry, and they didn't want to, like, cooperate. So I never had any exposure to, I never was taught anything or never was around any musicals, which is a shame in a way, but the good part of it is that I didn't learn anything bad, anything wrong, you know. I didn't learn a lot of rigid rules. I didn't learn anything. So terra nova.
Or tabula rasa.
One of those also.
We're thinking of using that as the instrumentation and that. Anyway. When I was in graduate school, getting my degree as a director, I directed Roadside, was what I did, and did a research paper about it. While there, I got a chance to direct the annual college musical, which was not put on by the drama department, but by sorority connected with the journalism department. But they had some money, and they offered money to me, or any, to whoever the director was, a student director. And it was a princely sum, which was like $200 or something like that. A lot of money at that time. And I jumped at the opportunity, and they were students submitted songs, and they submitted script ideas or scenes or whatever. And as I heard these things and read, there was sort of a competition. As I looked at them, I realized that this was horrible, this stuff. And I thought, my God, I can't direct this. This is just, it's like embarrassing. And so I thought, well, I can do better than this. So, not musically, I knew I couldn't. There was, at this time, in the art department, a very brilliant young painter named Harvey Schmidt, who played the piano by ear, and who we had a little social organization that had been there, part of the, connected with the drama department, but also open to students from other departments, called the Curtain Club. And there we used to do occasional musical numbers. And in 1950, in the fall, like September of 1950, the Curtain Club did 2 shows a year, one in the big theater and one in the theater, 500-seat theater. And they decided in the 500-seat theater to do a review. It was the half-century mark of the 20th century, to do a review of popular entertainment from 1900 to 1950. And directed, largely conceived and directed by Charlie Baker, who became Word Baker, who directed The Fantastics later on. Anyway, musical director for this was Harvey Schmidt. There's a picture of him out in the lobby, looking gaunt as a concentration camp survivor, really, you know, with a little funny mustache, and he was playing the piano. And all of the music was from the popular repertoire from that 50-year period, except for the opening number, which had music and lyrics by Harvey Schmidt. And Word Baker had decades, eons before Hello Dolly, had them build around the orchestra pit a little runway. And then Word also, very brilliant, gave free tickets to bald-headed men in the first row. First come, first served, you know. And the show was so popular that people were shaving their heads. But anyway, this song was called, as the show was called, Hipsy Boo. Hipsy -boo exclamation point. And Harvey's music, throughout the evening I will be doing mostly just talking some lyrics to make points, but and occasionally I will attempt to sing a little bit. Forgive me because, you know, it's like, it's pretty bad. But anyway, I'll give you a little sampling of Hipsy Boo. The girls, which came out and take the mesh stockings and little things, you know, and big things. And they were all Texas girls. And, you know, Texas girls, I think I mentioned in one of the talkbacks, they have a tendency to, like, have their, when they speak, it sounds like they have sinusitis or something, you know, it's like, but my God, they can be sexy and tall and good looking, you know. And anyway, they came out and they, around the runway, they sang to this effect, I'll just do a part of it. Hello, fellas, we're to greet you with a song and a smile, dance all the while. Hello, and so forth like that. And because we L-bump, O-bump, V-E, love you boys, we hope you're here to stay. And the show, that number and the show was a huge, huge hit. I mean, really, and being in college, where you had a cast of like 85 people. So anyway, faced with this problem of having this fee to direct the annual college musical, I thought of Harvey Schmidt, and I called him up, and I said, boy, I didn't call him up, he didn't call up people. I left him a note on the bulletin board, you know, of the drama department. And I said, would you meet with me, and would you like to write a musical with me? And I said, I'll share part of the fee with you. And he said, yes, he would like to. And so this one, the Hipsy Boo was in September. Our musical was to open in January 5th, this will be 1951. This conversation took place around Halloween or thereabouts. So between that time, November 1 and the Christmas holidays, where we both stayed in Austin to work to finish it, we wrote this musical, which it was a plot musical with a complete new score. And it was really, you know, even now, some of those songs really hold up very well. For that time and that place, it was an incredible revelation to the audience, and to us, for that matter. That was in the big theater, like 1,100 seats. It was such a fantastic success. It was only ran like, it's the same schedule, I think, exactly as you have in New York here, like Friday night, 2 Saturdays, 2 Sundays. And they sold out almost instantly. And then they sold out standing room, the back, and then they sold out the aisles so people could sit in the aisles. And then they had nothing else to sell out, so they opened the windows, and people literally gathered in groups on the windows to see things, and the people up near the windows would tell the other people what was happening. It was just this incredible success. And when it was happening, it was hot. You know, the give and take between the audience and the stage. It was so, just like, it was as if you were like at the opening night of South Pacific or something like that. It was just this hot thing was happening. In fact, our college friends, all these years, have felt like we've been going downhill ever since. But anyway, we didn't think that much about it. But it's really hard to get that out of your head. That kind of like, the audience reaction sounded like a Hitler Youth rally. You know, there's like shaking the walls. You know, and so I finished my master's degree soon after that summer, and immediately was drafted into the Korean War, which was very hot itself at that time and very destructive, and that's a whole long story. I mean, I was sent to a heavy weapons infantry outfit to California with absolute certainty of being shipped out as a heavy weapons infantryman, in which case none of these songs had ever got written, because there's no way I could have lived. I was the fuck up of all time. I really, you know, people shunned me because they were afraid if they got near me, they might get exploded by a hand grenade that I dropped or something. That's a, at our next meeting, I'll tell you what. But Harvey got drafted like 6 or 8 months or 10 months later, and he was in the Army in El Paso. I didn't get to thank you, God. I was at the last moment pulled out and given the chance to go to join the counterintelligence corps. countering intelligence wherever it reared its which wasn't too often, so I had some spare time. And so Harvey and I started writing songs by long distance mail.
Wait, now you were where?
I was in Baltimore, Maryland, and he was in El Paso, Texas. And so, and, you know, we again didn't take it that seriously. It's just, it was fun. I mean, that's one thing one of those foundations about the musical theater that used to be, is that it used to be fun. Even if you were serious, it was fun, you know? And serious always had a slight disclaimer. I mean, The King and I is serious in a way, but also it's sentimental too. Nothing wrong with that, actually. And it's, but damn sure, a lot of fun. You know, when you have the March of the Siamese Children, you know, it's a crowd over and over and over again. So, on and on, at some point, as I began to do more and more of these songs, I began to realize something. You see, you asked one question. It's about time for the intermission, right? But I began to realize before I encountered this that there was a kind of theater that I liked a lot, and the kind of theater that I didn't like as much, and the kind of theater that I didn't like as much was the theater that was the prevalent in 1950 in the United States and around the world, which was a more or less realistic or naturalistic theater. You had the proscenium marches, you had a curtain, the curtain went up, you had carefully disguised exposition, you know, like the phone rings. Oh, no, he isn't here. He's at Professor so-and-so's house getting, you know, what, you know. But, and it had, you know, sets that were supposed to be realistic. Something in me was turned off by that. And the kind of theater that I liked a lot was the theater that might be called presentational, that admitted for openers that you are in a theater, that this experience is in a theater. And I believed and believe that such an admission doesn't in any way take away from the emotional reality of what you're doing. Quite the contrary. For me, the more they admitted it was not real, the more I could believe in the reality. So I began to realize then that there was the parts of this theater that I liked. There were like 3 or 4 items. First of all, not being literally realistic, it was fluid. You could go any place. You could even stop things, you know, as the stage manager. And the theater I'm talking about was the theater of like Shakespeare, the Greeks, the theater of Bertolt Brecht, very much the theater of Thornton Wilder. Thornton Wilder, in the middle, he stops a certain scene and says, you know, no, let's see how this relationship got started. And he says thank you to the actors, and they go off. And in the Fantastics, El Gallo, narrator, very much influenced by the stage manager in our town, stops things at one point and says, now, grant me in your minds a month. The month goes by, the sky grows gray. A month goes by, it's a little bit colder. A month goes by, we're 1 month older. And there you've done it. You don't have to do it. You boom, there you are. You're a month later. So, the fluidity of the form, very much I liked the fact that it was not being literally real, it could have linguistic magic. Hamlet, when he's stabbed and is dying, he says to his friend Laertes, he says, "If ever thou didst love me, absent thee from felicity." Wow. Not make a big deal, don't go crying, whatever, just absent thee from felicity. Wow. And of course, that's not the way people realistically talk when they're stabbed. People, when they're stabbed, they go, "Oh God, oh my God, that hurts." And there was a great Beyond the Fringe, wonderful British group in 1961 with a great recording. If you're not familiar with it, it's the best review recording ever made, in my opinion. And but anyway, they do this one place where they do a send-up of Shakespeare, and they address that very issue. The man is stabbed, and he says, "Oh God," he says, "now is cold steel twixt gut and bladder interposed." And the other man says, "Oh, saucy rooster, just lie so still." But in other words, in addition to conveying the emotions of the character, language can be like music, can elevate and inform and color and enhance. In Henry V, the chorus, so-called, says at one point, "Now entertaining conjecture of a time when sleeping murmurs and the pouring dark do fill the wide vessel of the universe." And you're into a wonderful world of the magic of what's happening is connected to linguistic magic. If any of you are interested in this sort of thing, the best stuff you can see about it is a 9-part series, 9 one-hour sessions with the Royal Shakespeare Company, taught by Jones Part1. And the people taking the class are people like Judi Dench and Ben Kingsley and every major actor. And the very first 1-hour session addresses the issue of how can you, as an actor, be real when you're speaking what is clearly an artificial language. Not artificial emotionally, but a structured language. Very often in verse, most often in verse, sometimes even in rhymed verse. Okay, moving ahead. Is it lunchtime yet?
Not quite. So we left you all.
No, I'm going to finish. I'm going to finish these two.
Okay,
more
fine.
notes. Just to finish, and I'll try to. The other thing is, the thing about this presentational theater is that it can be, not being literally realistic, it can be schmaltzy. Again, thinking Shakespeare, when Lear goes mad, the entire world erupts into a howling storm, and so forth. There was another part, I can't think of it right now, but anyway, I came to realize that the one place where at that time, now it's a little different, but at that time, where all of these conventions that I liked were accepted as natural. Oh, I know. It was that you could have conventions, you could have a narrator, you could have direct speech to the audience, and so forth and so on. But those things are acceptable in the musical theater without people thinking about it. If people have to think about it, it's not good. It suddenly gets artsy, you know what I mean? But it's just like the natural métier. And people come and they do, there's elevated language, and they do soliloquies to you know, or they do whatever. I mean, and they have the fluidity of form. They go moving in and out, breathing. As Shakespeare if you want to learn how to write a musical, study, lay out the Shakespeare's things and see how they breathe big and then they breathe small. Okay, anyway, so I thought, well, if I can make a living, if I can survive in this and be surrounded by attractive young girls and boys, and what the hell, this is a good way to go.
So this was during your Army years? where you
Army,
had
and
this-
when I got to New York, I got to New York wanting to be a director, and I couldn't get any jobs as a director, you know, and I didn't know how do you show somebody what you could do as a director. So I almost immediately when I got here, I found out I had a friend who had been in our college musical who was here, who had a friend named Tom Posta. Do you know Tom Posta? Who was an actor who wanted to be a comedian. So my friend in college said, why don't you write us something? So I thought, yeah, I could do that. So I wrote a little sketch, and they did it at a tryout, and it went over very well. And then I started writing review material. And I just sort of gradually eased into becoming a writer, because with writing, you can at least show somebody something, you know. So
Now, was Harvey up here by then?
not at that time. And so, but a year after, then we got really a big splash with that thing. And so much so that we were hired by Julius Monk, who was the conférencier of the Ruban Bleu at that time. And we were just a disaster there. We were an absolute disaster. I'd never been to a supper club, and I was still writing this kind of wild, big stuff. The first thing we tried out was at one of the major Broadway theaters. We had a showcase. So, you know, people didn't know what to make of us, and I didn't know what to make of supper clubs. Later on, I kind of learned how to do it, and then I wrote lots of material for supper clubs. But after that disaster, I went back to Texas to lick my wounds and candle turkey eggs. My father had a turkey hatchery, so I just candling turkey eggs primarily consists of sitting there with a little steel wool and wiping the turkey shit off the turkey egg. And you kind of look at them, see if they're all right, and then you can do another. And listen to the radio. And, you know, it's very peaceful. Kind of a Zen experience. But anyway, then Harvey and I, when he got out of the Army, and I saved enough money in candling turkey eggs, we got him. I met him in Fort Worth, Texas, and we got on a Greyhound bus and rode to Alabama to join a Charlie Baker, who was teaching in Alabama, and we were all putting together this review called Portfolio. And then Harvey and I came to New York. Almost immediately, Harvey became hugely successful as a commercial artist, one of the top in America, one of the most awarded and sought after, doing the most incredible assignments, you know, really. But anyway, and then Harvey and I decided, I was teaching a drama group at St. Bartholomew's Community Club, $25 a week, and Harvey was loaning me money. He was very kind of it. And we just decided to try to write a musical, so we took this Rostand play called Les Romanesques and tried to make it into a big Broadway Rodgers and Hammerstein musical. We tried for 3 years to do it, and it just wouldn't get off. You know? We didn't know how to do it, first of all, and also the story was totally non-suitable for that. After 3 years, we were giving up. Ward Baker got a chance to direct 3 one-act plays at a summer theater that Millie Dunnett was running at Barnard College, using that stage, the Minor Latham Auditorium. And Ward said, I can persuade her to do one of them as a musical. Can you take that thing you've been working on for 3 years and make it into 1 act? And if you can do that in 3 weeks, I can give you a production 3 weeks after. So we took, and then we just threw out everything except try to remember. And then we just thought, we don't know how to do this. It's never going to get done anyway. We're just going to do what we like. And that meant, for me, doing the presentational things. We're going to do, like, I'm going to make it as much like, based on the writing, on what I was learning about Shakespearean technique. And then I also wanted to have this lifelong obsession, really, with the seasonal thing. And I decided to do that at the end of The Fantastics, which is basically, you know, a light romantic comedy. But there is a, you know, based on what I learned about Shakespeare, constant references to seasonal thing, to growth, to vegetation. And at the end it culminates when the boy and girl, both disillusioned, sit on either side of the wooden platform, and El Gallo stands between the narrator, in between them, forming a triptych. And he says directly to the audience, there is a curious paradox that no one can explain. Who understands the secret of the reaping of the grain? Who understands why spring is born out of winter's labor and pain, or why we all must die a bit before we grow again? Then the boy and the girl play a little scene of reconciliation, and then the mute, the character we agreed not to see, called the invisible prop man from the Oriental Theater, stands above them and sprinkles some white paper confetti, and the boy says, it's beginning to snow. And she says, I know. He says, here, take my coat. She says, no, both. There's room enough for both. All of those sounds, it's beginning to snow, I know, take my coat, we're both. All those soft sounds like snow. As the snow falls, and the snow erases everything. And you have a new beginning in their life. Before, they were so romantic. They lived in such what they considered such a dull, gray world, like Dorothy in the first part of Wizard of Oz. That the only way they could imagine their way out of it was in that raw, super technicolor. But here, when this moment happens, they're able to see things in true color and to realize that's enough. And that's all of that is happening under this little. And the reason The Fantastics has run for a long time, beautiful music, beautiful lyrics, but the subtext, which nobody ever thinks about that much, is more the cause of its endurance than anything else. And that's why, of course, a lot of productions are terrible. If you're not moved, deeply moved at the end, then something is very, very wrong. It doesn't matter how much you may have laughed beforehand.
So the Fantastics was done at Barnard as a one-act, with Susan Watson playing
Yes.
the girl,
Yes.
Louisa. And then shortly thereafter,
And Rod, Mary Linda Lavin, he played in Angels in America.
Liebman.
What?
Liebman.
Ron Liebman playing one of the fathers, if you can imagine, the 19-year-old well.
but shortly thereafter, Laurie Noto decided to do a commercial production downtown
Yeah.
at the Sullivan Street Playhouse. And that was the beginning of its 50-year run.
Well, it was a 42-year run.
42 yeah.
Then and after 42 years, it closed for, it closed in 2002 and reopened at the Snapple Theater and at the Jerry Orbach Theater in 2006, where it's still running, which is been 2,000 performances there. Nobody thinks that's anything, you know. What 2,000 performances? Something ran 42 years, but of course, actually, 2,000 performances is really quite something.
But particularly off-Broadway.
That's right. There are fewer long runs off Broadway than there are on Broadway, by a lot.
And it's the longest running musical in the world.
Yes, in the world. It's the longest running theatrical production of any kind in American history.
But there were many times along the way where it almost had to close, and Laurie Noto and you all did everything to keep it.
Well, it was rough in the beginning, and at the end of the first summer it began to pick up, and then it began to do pretty well, and then in the third year we were like at 5. You know, we weren't losing money, we weren't making a lot, but we were, and we're getting a kind of begin to build audience. Ed Ames sang "Try to Remember" on the Johnny Carson show, and it went over so well they asked him to come back the next night and sing it again, which he did. And then Hallmark Hall of Fame did a 1-hour version of it, and suddenly all the things just sort of came together at one time, and then everybody began to record "Try to Remember," and then there was like 8 years we were sold out every performance. Now, after Kennedy was assassinated, a year later, Jackie Kennedy wanted to bring her kids to the show. I couldn't get a ticket, and I had to go to a friend of mine I'd arranged tickets for, who was bringing her family. She said, "I'm as good as Jackie Kennedy. I'm not getting my ticket." I said, "Oh, if you'll do it, I'll take you all to an elaborate meal." And she said, "Oh, okay." But anyway, there was a sold out forever, and then it was sort of went in and out for decades, really, and finally dwindled to a rather shameful close. I thought we let it get run down. I felt very guilty about it. I still feel guilty. But let's move on down the fantastic.
Okay.
That's old news.
Well, that got you to many people's eyes and ears. Out of that came 110 in the Shade.
Yes, right.
David Merrick.
David Merrick, he was dating a girl. If you can imagine a girl in Fantastic dating David Merrick. Something's wrong. What's wrong with this picture? But anyway, he'd come to the Fantastic to see her, and it was like we'd been running a couple of years. 2.5 years. So I think got Dick Nash to come, and in Richard Nash, who wrote The Rainmaker. And that's how that all began. And by that point, we had learned more about how to put together a Broadway musical. We sort of self-taught, began to study the form. And it was an attempt to write in the Rodgers and Hammerstein form. We wanted to do things substantially differently, more than we were allowed to, as it turned out. For one thing, we wound up hiring Agnes DeMille, and she's a wonderful, tough lady, but wonderful. And she wasn't tough there. She was abused by David and Richard, and but she brought it herself. I don't have to say. We did not want it to be like Oklahoma, but we didn't want to be in competition with Oklahoma. So we wanted townspeople to look like townspeople. We didn't want the costumes. Oklahoma is lovely, but if you look at the Lumineers' costumes, they're really like something out of Carnivale, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But we wound up with the same designer, tall, what's his name? Started
Oliver Smith.
Huh?
Oliver Smith.
Oliver Smith, right. And Gene Rosenthal did the lighting. And, you know, so we had this meeting with Agnes and David, Harvey, and myself. said, you know, we don't want this, we love your work, but we don't want, this hasn't been conceived as supposed to have, you know, big dance kind of thing. She said, I don't want to do that anymore. I've done that, I want to like try, I want to do. So we said, okay, you know, we were reluctant, but our director, Joe Anthony, had been her dance partner when she had her own dance. So we went into rehearsal on 8th Avenue and 51st Street. There was a Y, a women's Y there, 51st, 52nd, 3rd, maybe 3rd. Anyway, the first day of rehearsal, she took her dancers, she closed the doors, and she went in and created 5 ballets. And they were all lovely, they all got cut. except one. And that one sort of stayed. It's the one she liked the least. But it was the one that seemed least like a stop to do, like just to do a ballet kind of thing.
Well, I don't know where they happened, but Harvey's drawings for his idea of what the sets should be for 110, which are on a poster from Signature out in the lobby, show a very different approach.
Well, and that approach was from we did those when we went to Dick Nash. I mean, he said, would you guys, you know, and we played them some songs from Roadside, early Roadside. He said, oh, that seems like good stuff. And so we said, look, if we're going to do this, we want to make sure we're all agreed on that we're all on the same page. So before we sign anything, Harvey did those paintings of what it should look like, and he and I came up, with a structure which is the thing that makes 110 shape works. And that was the idea of beginning the piece with the rising of the sun, following the sun hotter and hotter and hotter. And it was our idea to end the first act with the sunset, a flaming red sunset, Lizzie in a white dress in front of the sunset as she sings, oh God, don't let me live and die alone. Our specific inspiration was Scarlett O'Hara right before the act break and whatever that thing is called. Oh, she says, that God is my witness, I'll never be home again. And Dick Nash, who's his name was famously in Richard Nash, but his real name was Nathan Nussbaum. That's what he is from Philadelphia. And he said, oh yes, this is what we want. We want a Jewish ending. He said, at that he said we want to Greek it. If it's Jewish, it's just going to be like this. If it's Greek, it's going to be like this.
So, are there David Merrick stories out of the...
No, I'm interested in getting on to other things.
Okay.
You know, I mean, I don't mind talking about it. Obviously, people
It'll come
respond well to, I mean, there are plenty of horrible David. I mean, horrible David. But sitting there on stage, side and back for a rehearsal in Philadelphia, and all of Agnes's dancers were there. She wasn't there, and he sang, Agnes DeVille is over the hill. Agnes DeVille is over the hill. Like for 10 minutes. And then we had these meetings, and David, he turned, you don't know Harvey Schmidt, but Harvey's the sweetest, very quiet, generally speaking. And David said, you goddamn Harvey Schmidt, you never say a goddamn thing. And Harvey just sat there looking like it wasn't happening.
Tell the story about the sketch of David Merrick that Harvey did for Esquire.
Well, the only story about it is that Harvey did that on Seinfeld. This is before we ever worked with David Merrick. And for Esquire magazine. You know, Harvey did lots of things for Esquire. He did incredible, New Jersey's 300th anniversary Fortune magazine asked him to do a portfolio of painting, anything he wanted to do of New Jersey. So Harvey did these paintings, and then they reverted to him. He had a great agent, and then they were sold to the state of New Jersey, and they hang in the Capitol there somewhere. These paintings. But anyway, David Merrick, when he found out that Harvey had done that, he said, "I'm going to sue you for defamation of caricature."
But despite all the ups and downs, 110 must have resonated nicely with Mr. Merrick, because then he, out of that,
Yeah,
oh, you just saw.
not particularly, no.
Well, then,
I mean, Richard was not nominated for, well, Harvey and I were both nominated for Tonys. And so, but you know, David Merrick pretty much hated 110 A Shade of Vinci, or at least dismissed it. He hated Inga Swenson, who was so great in it, because David Merrick, you were talking earlier about microphones, and David Merrick was the first person to mic anybody on Broadway stage. In Carnival, Anna Maria Alberghetti. And David Merrick was semi-deaf in one ear, as it turns out. And, you know, you talked about Carol Channing had in her contract that her mic had to be louder than anybody else's. And, but I had occasion to go there several times, and sometimes I would see David Merrick walk into the back, and whenever he did, the sound of the people talking just went up exponentially. But Inga Swenson refused to wear a mic, and it took a lot of courage to stand up to David Merrick. And she said to him, "Mr. Merrick, if they can't hear me, fire me. I want to control my own performance." And that took, but he never forgave her for that. And also, he had made this big deal about, he had hired Al Holbrook to be Starbuck. And he was just going in rehearsal, and David Merrick found out he could get Robert Horton. And the only reason he wanted him was because Richard Rodgers had hired him for a piece that didn't come off well. I Picked a Daisy. And they had delayed a little. He thought he could get out. He hated Richard Rodgers. He hated him so much that if David Merrick could go into a place like the Rainbow Room with an orchestra, and he saw Richard Rodgers come in to have dinner or whatever, David Merrick would send one of his minions, his henchmen, to the orchestra leader and give him $500 or $1,000 to not play any Richard Rodgers. So that Richard Rodgers would go and think, "What's peculiar? Something strange is happening here." My favorite David Merrick story. I mean, you know, one of the big differences between him and Hitler is that he had a sense of humor. But he bought a Cadillac, and he was not pleased with the performance of it. And he went back to the Cadillac people, and they would not do it. They said it's perfectly fine. So he had his stage technicians that go to make this huge limo and attach it to the Cadillac. So wherever he drove in New York was this huge limo on top of the Cadillac. And of course the Cadillac people were immediately replaced his car.
But somehow out of that whole experience, I do happened.
Yeah, and that was because of Gower.
Yeah.
Because we had sworn we were not going to work with David Merrick again. Everybody was always swearing that. But on the other hand, I have to say, David Merrick, you've got good people, you've got theater parties, you've got a record album, although he took a cut off of it. You've got a production, you were guaranteed a reasonable run for Oakers, you know, and it was horrible as it was in some ways. It's probably better than the situation where you have 35 producers going up to get Tony Awards, you know.
So, in the show goes on, you told the story about getting the phone call from Gower champion.
Yes, right, yeah.
What do you think
Well,
of this
but,
idea?
actually, what had happened, Gower champion had seen the Fantastics in the first summer, hired Jerry Orbach for his first Broadway show, which is Carnival. And he loved the Fantastics, always did. And so after Hello Dolly, Gower called us to have lunch with him. He said, I really want to work with you guys. He said, I wouldn't know if you want to work with me. He said, I have to tell you, I am a benevolent despot, or dictator, benevolent dictator. He said, I am a dictator, but I am benevolent. He said, I'll listen to you, I'll work with you, all final decisions about everything, whether it's music, lyrics, lines, or anything else in mine. I'm in charge. And we were very eager to work with him. I'm a big fan of the staging of Hello Dolly. I think it's just beautiful. Although, maybe looking back at it, it's a little too over the top in some areas, but the style of it is really wonderful. Anyway, so Gower had optioned a book by Bimmelmann's called The Street Where the Heart Lies, about Parisian strippers. Harvey had taken this villa in Italy, and we went over to work on this street where the heart lies. I circled by way of Paris with my wife, and we spent just a few days. I spent my few days in Paris. It was late spring, I went there, and it was going to small-time strip clubs. And I felt so sorry for the girls because they had turned off the heat for the winter. So the girls, they would do this like exotic thing, bear this and bear that, and then they would sit out there, and you'd see the goosebumps just go all the way up. You could see they were totally exposed, and you could see like they were freezing to death. Good for the nipples, but everything else suffered.
So then you went to Italy to write the...
Yes, and we got a call from Gower asking about the four-poster, and unlike our little story, I really responded, well, we both did. I thought it was very interesting challenge right from the beginning. So, and so we did, again, like we did with the Huntington, let us see if we can break it open. We broke open the form for 110 of the Shape. And it's like, even though I wasn't doing the book, it was essential to me to have some control over the form. So we said, let's see if we can break this open. And so that was the challenge, and we felt that we did do that in a way that Gower was impressed by and would accept. So dictator though he was, it still was our form.
So it was your second Broadway show, the second one with David Merritt.
Yes.
First one with Gower Champion, but it very unusual. There's two characters.
Yes, right, absolutely. And we had to, Gower kept wanting to kind of slip out of that, you know, but we kept wanting to.
I mean, add other people.
Yes.
Oh,
And later, when he dubbed us, when he did he co-wrote the movie scenario for it. He also didn't like them. The whole point of the piece was that they get over and turn over the bed to a younger couple. But when he did his movie version, instead of that, they adopt 12 Korean orphans. So, Marge, who will be here for Marge Champion, was a dear friend of ours and was matron of honor at our wedding, Janet. So she came out. She wasn't around that much because he wanted to break free from somebody, a nagging voice in his ear, you know. But she came and when we were out of town in Washington, and finally she persuaded him what the hell, this is what it is. You grow old, you die, you give it over to the young people. But it was something he resisted very much. Marge, let me tell you a story about Marge. When I turned 80, which is a while back, I was playing the old actor in the Fantastics in this revival. And it happened to fall on a Sunday, so I had a matinee and an evening, and it was a great excuse to not have a party, which I did not want to have. So we just went to a restaurant next door between shows with my wife and our 2 sons, and Marge came over, who was 88 at that time. And so she came over and sat down and ordered a double vodka martini on the rocks. And then she put her arm around me and she said, you know, I have a thing for younger men. Which was absolutely the nicest thing anybody said to me.
I think we're at a point where we should take a little break.
Okay, well that's good because the more interesting stuff is coming up now.
Oh, see, that's why he's the right.